Hello and welcome to the WEBRTC Working Group meeting in July 14th, 2026. Next slide. This group abides by the W3C patent policy, and only companies and people listed in the link below are allowed to make substantive contributions to the WEBRTC specs. Next slide. This is our July meeting. Upcoming meetings, we have a link there to our wiki. There's no meeting in August, so we meet again in September on September 15th. Next slide. It's a link to our meeting info. And I should have updated this slide. I think we don't necessarily need a scribe anymore. But Karin, are you able to run some of the tooling?
Yes, I'm taking notes on IRC, so it will be, the presentation will be incorporated in the minutes.
Perfect, very nice, thank you. All right, this meeting operates under the W3C Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. We're all passionate, but let's keep it conversations cordial and professional. Next slide. We used raise hand in Google Meet to enter the speaker queue. And next slide. It's a slide on our document status. Hasn't really changed. Next slide. So this is our list of issues for discussion today. Again, we have a light group, but also a light agenda, so we hope to have sufficient time. So if we go a little over, it might be fine. So the first item here is a media capture screen share. And I think Palak, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, it's correct, yeah.
Great, thanks. Go ahead.
Cool, I can start then. Yes, hi everyone. Today I want to talk about proposing an audio preferred capture in the existing GetDisplay Media API. I first want to start talking about the use cases, like why we need this. We already have an existing issue in the screen share spec that talks about having an audio only capture, where people have talked about why there's a need of an audio only capture API within the GetDisplay Media API or like a separate API. In addition to this, we have identified some use cases as well, such as in the context of a note-taking applications, which wants to use audio capture along with the screen capture to do transcriptions. Friends who are co-watching videos always require both audio and video capture to have the best experience. Similarly, game streaming and presentations with media need both audio and video capture to be functioning properly. Next slide, please. Thanks. In this proposal, we are not proposing an audio only capture. That's because it will not satisfy all the use cases that we just talked about. And we also believe there'll be a big departure from the current GetDisplay Media API model. The way the model is today, it's very clear to the users about what is being shared. And we think with just the audio only capture, it can be confusing. Also, GetDisplay Media has always been about video has always been mandatory, and audio has been optional. Changing the model to make it only audio optional or video optional risks compatibility and privacy issues and requires a much deeper discussion. And finally, if an application really wants only audio capture and doesn't want video, it always has the option to close the video track after it calls GetDisplay Media. Next slide. We propose adding an option called audio preference to the existing dictionary display media stream options, which would be of a enum type called audio preference enum. And this enum will have two values called high and default. High meaning that the application really prefers capturing audio along with video, and default meaning the application doesn't have any preference regarding audio capture. And when the user agent sees this option being set, let's say it sees the audio preference set to high, it can use that to make audio capture on by default. Next slide. Here is an example on how the application can use it. So basically, it starts by first calling get display media with video and audio true, and also sets the newly added option audio preference to high. Then it checks if it got any audio tracks. And if it does, then it passes that to its internal function. Let's say it's called start taking notes. And yeah, so the function just starts taking notes, this past audio track. But if it did not get any audio track, let's say the user chose not to share audio, then the application will just fail, and this will surface a failure message to the user, and that should return it. And the application can then use the captured video track to be rendered as well for the user to show it. Yeah. And that is our proposal. Discussion. Yes, Yanima.
Yes, so this sounds reasonable to me. I guess on the wording, high preference is that I see a lot of the other options usually use include, exclude, which doesn't fit here. But so I think high works. I don't have a strong opinion, I guess. But my question is a little more about how do we anticipate this appearing to the user? So what would be the change if as a web developer I add this preference? How does that affect the user experience, for instance, in Chrome?
I think so. We plan on making, I think, window sharing more active, because right now the audio sharing for Windows is not really the highest priority. But let's say it can be the case if the preference is high, or we can show a dialogue telling the user, hey, this application really wants it. So use that. So basically telling the user that this application really wants audio capture some way, which we can't do today.
So I think in today there's a checkbox for audio that's off by default, so it might be on by default, for example.
Yeah, that is possible. Yes.
And there's no requirement here, so a browser could still return video only. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's great. We did talk about, Gino and I, about having a single value in the enum. I don't know how that sounds, like just high or strong or something like that.
Yeah, there is some. Then you're basically, yeah, Gino.
Yeah. What I like, of course, so those specific names and the specific values are subject to like sharing when we have a PR. Like one of the things I was thinking was that, of course, not passing the hint could also be the default. So the enum currently has two values, like to say, okay, we really prefer the audio, or we don't really care. So you can do what you normally do, but of course, if you don't pass the hint, that would sort of be the same. So maybe we could have an enum with just one value and make it enum just to have a more easy to understand value for developers. But yeah, but I guess the idea is the same. Tim?
I'm struggling to think about, like, isn't there an overloading between the value audio true and the audio preference being I don't care? There's a sort of slight tension there, isn't there? Or am I misunderstanding that?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm not sure I entirely understood your concern, Tim.
Well, I'm just thinking, if default is no, I mean, I just think there's two things with audio there that appear to kind of overlap in a space, and I maybe it's just a name thing. Maybe coming out with the right names makes it less confusing for me. I'll when there's a PR, I'll comment.
Okay. So my comment was going to be here. I think this. Excuse me, 1 second. So I think this feature is good. I mean, the sort of a detail where bike shedding on the value. There is some precedence in the stream spec for readable stream reader mode, which has a single enum of BYOB. So technically, you don't need 2 enums here. I think it's more of a style choice. It seems a little odd. I mean, clearly there is a default. So whether we want to have a value for it or not, it's a little relying on the API surface here that the absence of the auto preference is the default, basically. So having a default value also is nice, but not necessary. I don't have a strong opinion, really. I kind of think it's a little weird to only have 1 enum, but that's just, I don't have a strong preference.
No. And I'd like to add, just to clarify to Tim, that there's a difference because audio true means, like the way we get display media has always worked is that audio is optional, and it has always meant that it's possible. So if you say audio false, it could mean, hey, I really don't want audio, and audio true is, okay, I can accept audio, but since get display media doesn't really so this is more like a hint for the application to say, hey, I can, like, audio is essential for me, whereas the audio true has always meant that audio is optional, like the application can handle audio, but it's not that it requires it. So this is more like the application internally requires it, but the user always has the final choice. So it's like for the user agent to know, okay, the application really needs that. So for example, if we make audio on by default for this application, it will give its users a much better experience, because having it off by default, which has been the case, at least for example for Chrome, in most cases, users will normally don't just go with the default. So then the application will constantly prompt show errors to the users and tell them, hey, please enable audio, try again and enable audio. So it's a better experience if the application can tell the user agent, pass the user agent that preference, and it's still a hint. So the user agent can try to make things better for the application and the user, but the user still always has the final say.
So if no one else has a preference, I think we could try a single enum value to start, because we can always, it's much easier to add enum values than remove them. And I think if had there been a way to read back the value later or change the value later, then I would say you would need 2 enums. But in this case, since it's only a constructor option, we don't need it.
Okay. Great, I'll send a PR then. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
So I guess as a solution, we can say that there is a reasonable consensus for this, and that Palak can prepare a PR and send for review so that we can discuss the details there about the naming and that kind of thing. Does it sound right?
Great. Next slide. Next slide. This is Guido, right?
Yes, this is me. So I'm going to talk about diagnostic logging. So I'm going to start with this issue filed by ByteDance some time ago. We discussed this at TPAC for a different proposal, but this is a different proposal from the one we had at TPAC. So just to refresh what the issue is about. ByteDance here says that we know WebRTC provides get stats for developer debugging, but sometimes this is insufficient. From a developer's perspective, when debugging online problems, WebRTC native has a lot of logs, but it's disabled by default in browsers. Chrome provides a command line log arguments to activate native logs, but not others. Sometimes developers need those WebRTC native logs to analyze online problems. So the request here is to be able to add a local back function to RTCP connection to print WebRTC native logs and add log level configurations to RTC configuration. So the proposal here is not to do exactly what they're requesting, but something similar. So the use case here is to help web developers or users, and by users we mean either individual users or organizations that have substantial deployments of WebRTC web applications. Then by allowing the user agent to log internal WebRTC diagnostic data. And another use case we have is to allow users and applications developer to collaborate with user agent vendors by making it possible to share these diagnostic logs with the user agent vendor. And at least in Chrome, we intend to target these to enterprise users, so and web developers. So the proposal here doesn't expose any data to the app. So this is not like the event logging proposal that we made at TPAC that is kind of exposing things similar to get stats, but with more timing information. So this one is different. This one doesn't expose anything to the app. This is more like creating local logs, the logs that this developer is requesting, but in a way that is not accessible to JavaScript, but that can be started by JavaScript, but subject to explicit user authorization. And in our case, we intend this authorization to be, for example, the enterprise policies, since we're targeting this to enterprise users. So since this is not exposed to the app, so the login format can be specific to the user agent, and the data can be optionally shared with the user agent, let's say to file a bug and say, okay, this is the logging information. So the way the API would work would be something like this. Of course, again, subject to discussion, the specific naming, but it will be something like this. Like we will have a function called start diagnostic logging. The application can pass some metadata so that, for example, they could add if the organization wants to identify, say, their calls. So because they want to process the logs themselves, that they could use this metadata to add that type of information. And we add a function called finish diagnostic logging that ends all logging, and cancel logging that not only ends the logging but removes any logging that could have happened. So this start diagnostic logging function, it always returns a random ID that identifies the login session. So even if the operation doesn't succeed, so this is a best effort API. So the application cannot know if the user has authorized or not authorized diagnostic logging. So start diagnostic logging never fails. It just returns a user ID that in a best effort way identifies a potential login session. It takes an optional metadata argument that allows applications to add extra data, like I said before, and it can also take a Boolean that allows sharing with the user agent, in which case it's useful for filing user agent bugs. So, for example, this would be the ideal. So we introduce, since this is we wanted to work similarly to the enable login switch that users can pass. So we don't want to complicate this by making it specific for peer connections and having configuration specific for the logging of a specific peer connection. We prefer to have just a global login function that logs WebRTC activity for this session at the discretion of the user agent. And so, due to lack of a better place to place these kind of global functions, we're introducing an RTC object that just has these operations: start, diagnostic, login, finish, and cancel, and the options that have the metadata and the allow upload bit that would be the one that would allow sharing with the user agent, in which case if false by default, but to say if an application that has a bug and we believe it's a user agent bug, they could have this allow upload to true and then file a bug and pass the UUID returned by start diagnostic login to say, okay, describe the bug and said, okay, the login session was this ID. And if the session, if the login actually happened, then maybe the user agent can have access to, the user agent, the vendor can have access to those logs. But so yeah, that's it. And like I said, our intention in Chrome is to restrict this just to enterprise users and make the authorization gated by enterprise policy. Yes, Jennifer.
So if you could go back a slide. It's the proposal that this RTC object and these methods would exist all the time or only for enterprise users?
If we had a way to make them available only for enterprise users, that would be best. But I'm not sure Chrome, at least Chrome has that ability to make these objects available only for enterprise users. So we might make them available all the time, but since it's a best effort API, it would return a random number, but it would do nothing.
To elaborate, my concern is that the ability for a website to detect an enterprise user. So I think it would be preferable to find a way that made that a little harder.
Yeah, in that case, it's better to have it on all the time, because then you don't know if it's an enterprise user or not. It's just there.
Well, but even then, they could just they could see that the method is there, and then they could still call the method. So a couple of points. I was kind of hoping we already have static methods on the RTC peer connection object, like the generate certificate method. So my first thought would be maybe these could be static methods.
Could be, yeah. I think we could do that. Yes, yeah, I think we could do that.
And the other question, I'm wondering if they should be asynchronous. Have you thought about this potentially creating any permission prompts?
Permission prompt. No. We haven't thought. I mean, it could be. I mean, I don't see why an implementation I mean, I think it would be great in the sense that users normally have a lot of prompts when using WebRTC, so this would add like prompt fatigue. So that's why, at least in the way we plan to implement it, would be like restricted by administrators, and administrators would enable it, and that would be it. So, but yeah, another way could be also via settings in a dialogue that the user could personally enable
Right.
it if say and yeah, a prompt could be possible, but I wouldn't use anything like any integration with permissions API or anything like that. I mean, the idea here would be that you call it, you get a random ID, and that's it. You don't know if that ID will actually be useful or not, if logging is actually happening or not.
Right.
An enterprise can know because they configure it and they can say process the logs themselves if they want to. But that's it.
So then, yeah, I think I like that. So that explains why the method is synchronous, and there wouldn't be any. So basically, if the method, then I would suggest the method is always there and it just doesn't do anything useful for non-enterprise users.
Yes.
That should solve the fingerprinting issue, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think that makes more sense. And I think at least in Chrome, I don't think we have a way to just enable something for enterprise users, because it's like in a more semantic way, it's unclear exactly what an enterprise user is. Like some people, it's clear that they're enterprise users. Some people, it's clear that they're not. But there's always a gray area that someone might not have some system installed, but it's actually an enterprise user. So I think it's best to just have it there, and it just returns the value and does nothing. Tim?
Yeah, I second the idea of not having it on Navigator and having it on RTC peer connection. I think it's clearer to move it. Makes it clearer what the scope is immediately for the developer. So I like that. I'd kind of like to find a way of non-enterprise people being able to access it somehow, even if it's like a feature flag or something. I think it would be good for, like, I can imagine myself wanting to use this, but not being an enterprise customer. So I think that would be nice somehow.
Yeah. Yes, I would say that like the API definition doesn't require that to interfaces. It's just the way we're thinking of targeting this. But we could add a dialogue, like a setting somewhere in content settings where you can explicitly enable it if you want to.
Cool, thanks.
Sorry, just a follow-up question on the diagnostic logging options. There's a record of DOM string metadata. Could you talk about that, and also the allow upload?
Yeah. So the record is just a map, so that the application can record some arbitrary data together with the logs. So that's useful. For example, if an enterprise wants to process the logs and identify the calls, they could use those fields to add custom data there to identify what the application was doing or something like that. And the allow upload is that it allows sharing that with the user agent, say uploading it to an entry point of the to an endpoint provided by the user agent that would allow, for example, filing bugs against the user agent in case the application suspects that the bugs they're seeing are not in the application but in the user agent. So they could share the logs, but we don't want that sharing to be exposed to the application. Just that the user agent, if authorized, and if the application is requesting it, it can upload the log to the user agent, and then when filing the bug, the user filing the bug could reference the login session with the value returned by start diagnostic login.
All right, thanks.
So in terms of So no one else is raising their hand. So I guess we have some rough consensus on at least no big objections on the proposal, but just recommendations on changing the surface to be static methods on RTCP connection and things like that. Yep, good. Okay, that's all for diagnostic logging. The next topic is an encoded source update, which is it's also me. So go ahead. So encoded source is an API that we have talked about for some time now, and we have started prototyping with it. So I just wanted to give an update on what we have found, what some developers have told us about it, and what use cases or what things are important for some use cases. So I'll just go briefly through the proposal and to the specific things we have tried and the specific things we like, the state of things in terms of how we want to proceed in terms of standardization for those things. So the general idea is that we allow an application to insert encoded frames directly into an RTC-RTP sender. And the idea is to support use cases like peer-assisted media delivery, where a few nodes connect to a server sending data, and after that, data is forwarded internally through a lot of nodes inside an organization. So that matches. There are a lot of products that try to do this. So this is an API or that actually do this, and this is an API to better support that use case. And also for applications that want to use custom codecs, that they want to use peer connection to do all the communication, but they don't want to use the codec internally used by the peer connection, but do the encoding in the application. For example, using web codecs or using a custom codec written using WASM or whatever the application wants. And the basic API surface for this is that in the sender we add a create encoded source method, which is similar to the encoded transform constructor. I prefer a method, but this is subject to changing it to assigning an object in a constructor, but I prefer a method, so I always present it as a method, but of course this is subject to discussion. And then once you invoke this method, it follows the same pattern as encoded transforms. This is a similar API, and you get an event in a worker, and in the worker you get an encoded source object, and the encoded source object is similar to a transformer object, except that it only has a writable. It doesn't have a readable, and it has other things, but here I'm just presenting the writable just to emphasize that it doesn't have a readable like a transformer. So for now, this is all. Yes, Jennifer.
Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted questions at the end, or I had a question. I jumped ahead a little bit, so I didn't. Apologies if you're covering this in later slides, but I didn't see it. So if someone calls this method on the sender, what happens to its track, and how are you then locked in? How do you remove this again?
Yeah, I guess. Well, we have to decide the details of what happens in that case. It could be similar to replace track, for example. That could be one way that we handle it. Another way is that if everything is already ongoing. So the sender was created with that track, so it has a track associated to it, and it's already moving data. I mean, we could also fail, so we could reject the
Right.
promise.
So if we followed,
yes.
like for just a recap, for transforms, there's a transform attribute that you can assign to an RTB transform object that you can then set to null later if you want. So I'm wondering if we did a similar thing here, we could have a source attribute alongside the transform attribute that you assign to an RTC source. And then maybe that source could be reset to null, or it could be passed into replace track. I'm wondering if that might be better.
We can do that. We can certainly do that. I'm always pushing for. I'm always starting with a method because it's just that what we found when we implemented the transformer was that it, like having it as a property and a constructor, added more implementation difficulties because once you create the transformer, it's not associated to anything yet. So you have to create objects, and the event and everything is not associated with anything. And then when you assign it, then you have to connect everything.
Right.
And the use case for not having it associated to having the transform standing there, not associated to a sender or receiver in the case of the transform, it's not a use case that a lot of people have requested. So I'm starting with a method which makes implementation easier without severely impacting method, but we can certainly go the other way. It's not that it's like makes things enormously complicated.
Yeah, that's good that we're flexible there, because I worry that a method is simpler because it's more limiting. But as a standard, we're going to get people who ask, well, what happens when I call a replace track? What happens to all these cases? So I worry that down the road, that more limiting an option might create us more headaches.
Yeah, I agree that I'm definitely open to making it. I mean, it might even be better to do it that way, so that for consistency with more consistency with the encoded transform. So,
right, awesome.
So that's definitely not a blocker in any way. Yeah. So the way the API works is like we're kind of plugging in an encoder. So it's not that's the main difference with encoded transform. Encoded transform adds like inserts a box after the encoder. This one kind of adds a bypass on the encoder. So it replaces the WEBRTC encoder with an application supply one. So you could imagine it that instead of using the built-in encoder, you have a proxy encoder, and it's a proxy for whatever the application does. So the insertion point is before the encoded, the one for encoded transform, and you could still use encoded transform together with the encoded source, because the encoded transform is like right after the encoder, while this one replaces encoder. The feedback we have received from developers is that the new constructors, explicit constructors for RTP encoded audio and video frame, because that's essential for a lot of use cases. So right now, it's impossible to create an encoded frame if, say, you have some codec that encodes things, and then you want to create an RTC encoded audio video frame. Well, right now that's not possible. And the other thing is signals to control the encoder, which was part of the original proposal. And in discussions with developers, yeah, they agree that those are needed, but an important thing is that they said some are more important than others. So like I said, the constructors are essential, and what we have found is that the audio is a relatively easy case. So we have a proposal ready for discussion. because audio is easier because it doesn't have the distinction of doesn't have delta frames. It doesn't have dependencies. Like it's typically you just have a bunch of data and plus the metadata, and that's it. Whereas video is a bit more complex. We have a prototyped video, a constructor for video too, but only for simple cases like no dependencies, like just taking a frame that can be keyframe, delta frame, and adding it, but no, say, layers and dependencies and things like that. So we already have some prototyping working for the simple cases for video, but are exploring solutions for like the more advanced options and codec specific, and maybe even codec specific features. Yes, Jennifer.
Sorry, but don't we already have constructors for encoded video?
I mean, we have a constructor, but it's more a copy constructor that allows changing the metadata.
Oh, yes.
But
so this would be creating it from scratch.
Creating from scratch, yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. So for the constructor, for the audio constructor, it turned out to be quite simple because we can everything that's needed to create an audio is also already exposed in a way in the metadata or the main fields of the RTC encoded audio frame. So we just need an init that takes all that data, and that's enough to create an audio frame that works well. So we take the payload type, the data, the contributing sources, main type, audio level, capture time, and here I have a slight in italics the content, a field called content type and a field called RTP timestamp without offset. And we can discuss the naming of that. So there are two details there. So this content type and takes speech or other. It's just a field. We don't have that exposed in encoded audio frame, but it typically it exists internally in the WebRTC, and in the WebRTC algorithms can use that information as I think to optimize some operations. So we're adding it as part of the init, although we're not exposing it as let's say once it's created, you cannot read it. We're not adding it to the metadata or to any other field. We're just adding it as an option to initialize the field. And we also have this timestamp without offset. So RTP timestamp is a metadata field in both audio and video frames. The only difference is that RTP timestamps, once you have an actual RTP connection, they start with a random value, and then it increases from that random value, and that value is part of like the sender knows that value. But when you create a frame, that frame is not associated to a sender yet. So what we are adding here is we're calling it without offset, in the sense that it doesn't have that initial random value. It's just like the increase on top of that initial random value. We're calling it without offset because that initial start value, random start value in libWebRTC is called offset, but it might be a confusing name because offset could be actually the increase, not the initial value from an API perspective. But that's what this field would mean. But if you provide these things, that's all you need to support audio, and you can support developers we have talked to. They see no need for anything else there, and really audio, since audio is simpler, that there's really nothing else that we really need. So well, this is This is just what I said. So this constructor, well, yeah, we have confirmed that it works well with prototyping, and it's useful for a lot of use cases without any additions. Like we can add additions in the future if we add more metadata to audio frames if we need to. But this supports everything that we currently support with audio frames in encoded transform in particular. So what we would like is we have already played with this one to some significant extent. I think we would like to make a proposal, to make a PR, and to send it for discussion. Yeah, so that's one of the parts. Then the next part of the update is concerns the signals. Yes, Anivar.
So yes, so I think just going back, since you're changing topic a little bit here, on the constructor, one of the things that we've suffered in RTC encoded transform is that we have our own classes for RTC. We have RTC encoded video frame, whereas WebCodex has encoded video chunk, which is sort of the same thing. And I do notice, I just looked up that encoded video chunk does have a constructor that takes an encoded video chunk in it, where you can pass in an array buffer, a type, timestamp, duration, and data. So my question is twofold, I guess. Have you considered WebCodex as a potential input to these APIs? And if, I know we've talked about constructors in the past about converting one WebCodex frame into an RTC frame. And I'm wondering if we can do two birds with one stone here, and if we still focused on, instead of adding this constructor to create RTC video frame from an init, maybe we could somehow tie it to using the WebCodex version, and if we could save a constructor that way. I'm not sure exactly how that would work yet, but just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, so we have tried. We have built already tested in prototyping, like using WebCodex, taking the result of WebCodex to create frames this way. So we could add a constructor that takes an encoded chunk for sure, but we also would need to add the metadata, because there are like RTC specific metadata that the encoded chunk doesn't have. So we could have a constructor that takes that, or that we add that to the init, and we have a logic. We could have a logic to make sure that the fields don't contradict each other. But with the constructor in this way, you can take things from the encoded chunk and initialize the fields in the init and initialize that way. But having one for encoded, so you could potentially team one, like shim and encoded chunk one with it. But we could add another, like either a field to the init that has an encoded chunk, or a separate constructor that takes an encoded chunk plus the metadata, and that might be useful if we could, say, optimize the creation of the encoded frame by, say, maybe moving the payload and save a copy in terms of implementation. We haven't looked into that detail, but yeah, I'm open to discussing that. But for the cases where we don't start with an encoded chunk, we would need this. Like, let's say if an application is using a WASM codec, so it just produces payloads. So we would still need one like this. I think
I'm just
too much to.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you've considered so there's a writable and no readable, but have you considered having the writable accept RTC encoded video frame or RTC encoded video or encoded video chunk? That way, because I think you need the first one for the fan out case, right? Where you're going to be copying using the existing copy constructor. And then if you could also pass in encoded video chunks directly, which can be created from JavaScript and array buffers, would you need this new constructor?
Could be. We haven't tried that. I mean, we could simulate it by not initializing all the metadata. We like just initializing what we can from the coded chunk. So we can certainly consider that. So that would be, of course, would be more a change in the would be something in the encoded source itself. So allowing the writer to take encoded chunks. Yes, I think that's a good idea to explore if we could say insert encoded chunks and if we can initialize things in a way that still works, at least for some use cases, without providing all the other information that RTC encoded audio frame supports.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Good. So moving on to signals. So applications require some signals to better control the encoder, and this is especially true for video. So for video, it is mandatory to know keyframe requests so that the application level encoder can know that, okay, it can, the other side is sending keyframe requests. We need to, so that the application knows that it needs to produce a keyframe. This signal is already exposed. It's already specified in encoded transform. Although I think no one has implemented it yet. So this is an event in the sender. The other one that is mandatory for video is to know the allocated bit rate and an event with changes to it, so that the application can configure the encoder to produce frames with the right bit rate. And the other signals that we have talked about that are more like nice to have, but are useful, but not as important as the other two, are like the expected queue send time, which was part of the original proposal, but at least the developers we have talked to, they said that it's nice to have, but it's not really necessary for most use cases, and the available outgoing bit rate. So if we add these signals to the encoded source, then we would have the on-keyframe request event handler, which already exists in encoded transform. So this one, yes, Peter.
Oh, I was going to comment later. I just wanted to say I think that this work in general is great. So that's all.
Good. Good. So we have well, a field for the allocated bit rate, bit per second, and an event to report changes to it. So those would be like the most essential parts. Then the available outgoing bit rate and an event for changes to it, and the expected send queue time. So the proposal here would be to go in using an iterative approach. So a scope will say a V1 to the writable, the keyframe requests, and the allocated bit rate, and try to go for that first, and then add the additional signals as a follow-up. And finally, we have the video constructor. So we have experimented with this one, which is a simple version. So it has we have an RTC encoded video frame in it. It takes a video frame type. So if it's key or delta, payload type, data, capture time. So similar to the audio one. So for audio, this simple thing works for everything basically, but for video, it works for plenty of use cases, but there are many use cases that are not supported by this simple constructor. We have confirmed that we can, like, using web codecs, we encode and we can initialize the payload, and then if we add the metadata correctly, and insert it in an encoded source, it works. We have prototyped that, and that works. Also, this looks promising. But we need more prototyping to support more advanced features before making a proposal for standardization for video constructors. So that's it. That's the status of encoded source from our side. Any more questions? Yes, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, overall, I think that this looks great. I'm very encouraged to see this being standardized in some shape. And I guess I had a curious question about if you could explain a little bit about available, so allocated bitrate and how that would basically be the WEBRTC feedback signal. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So basically, those are signals that encoders receive the WEBRTC, and the WEBRTC uses that to configure encoder like in an opaque way, but to make sure that the sense of that the quality and things that it produces matches that bit rate and so on. So it would be, since we are like replacing that encoder with and one in the application, and so we would basically have a proxy one that passes that signal up to JavaScript, so that the application can try to do the same thing, but in a way that the application controls.
Right. If we can somehow, this seems like an API shape that at least promises to unite two use cases of the fan-out case and also the web codecs case. And if we can do that in an elegant way, I think that's good to support.
Good. Okay, so I guess we can note that there's rough consensus on the progress, that it looks promising, and then, well, we'll try to start making PRs as we see that things become like ready for standardization, and some things are like our prototyping has provided good results, so we continue that way. Good. So now we go to the wrap back, which is Jennifer.
That's me, and we are right on time, which is excellent. So I'm hoping, I don't have too many issues here, but it's a big one. So I'm hoping this can go. So I'll be talking for a little bit here, just trying to catch people up. Last meeting, we looked at the following issues but didn't quite finish, and they're all around talking about two APIs, get local candidates and get remote candidates on the ICE transport object. And this is on our interrupt schedule to flesh out. So we have had some resolutions last time, but quickly, we didn't really get to the meat of it. How are we going to specify that these two methods are underspecified? I think it's fair to say. So to recap, no one is implementing get remote candidates. Chrome has an implementation that basically returns an empty array, which I don't think counts. And for get local candidates, Chrome has the only implementation. And looking at it with a fiddle, it seems to return not just the current candidates, but every candidate that it has ever seen, which means every time you do an ICE restart, that list grows. So I wanted to explore a little bit if that was the original intent of the spec. So I have some slides on that. Next slide, please. So we're trying to deduce the original intent here. And Fippo last meeting had on the GitHub issue a comment that provides some evidence. He's basically I'm going to read it. It says, my recollection of how these APIs were supposed to work in ORTC, which is where they came from, is you build your SDP M sections, or your signaling from the get local candidates to get remote candidates on the ICE transport, and you would call the transports add ICE candidate to add them, including your JS written SDP parser. And the context here is that he was actually writing a shim. He was trying to shim peer connection on top of ORTC. And then it says, in contrast, WebRTC was always the objects return what was negotiated via SDP, so you don't have to parse the SDP. So I would expect get local candidates to be basically a polyfillable on top of the local and remote description. In short, in ORTC, these were inputs to negotiation, potentially without, before SDP existed, ORTC wasn't big into SDP. But in WebRTC, this is basically in the SDP in the local and remote description. Next slide, please. Some more evidence. There are actually 4 methods that should be looked at together. There's get local candidates and get local parameters, and then get remote candidates and get remote parameters. So parameters in this case is RTC ICE parameters, which is basically the username fragment and the password. What's interesting here is that we look at the get local parameters and get remote parameters methods. They do not return arrays, which means that it's only possible to observe the latest UFrag and password and not every generation. So together, I think this strongly suggests that the intent here was introspection into the current SDP and nothing more. Next slide, please. Peter?
Yeah. I wouldn't phrase it as introspection into the SDP. It's more like introspection into the state of the peer connection, which SDP might be one way to introspect that, but this is a direct way. It's not that you get the SDP and it's parsing it for you. It's more like you're getting to the same state the SDP might. And actually, I don't even know if the SDP always includes all of the remote candidates every time you go to get it, but it might. I don't remember.
It does, I believe. So that's my.
But yeah, I think the purpose of these methods was to get at state without having to parse SDP.
I definitely know that for local gathering, before you get a nice candidate, the candidates that are gathered are also stuffed into the local description at the same time. And I'm fairly confident the same is true with that guy's candidate, but if that's not the case, then that is worth checking after the meeting for sure. But I do believe the same is true there.
Yeah. Oh, it's so sad.
So
Fix it though.
does that answer your question? But so yeah, I agree with you that it's about the state of the peer connection. But the argument I'm going to make is that all of that state is captured in SDP in WebRTC.
Okay. That's very sad. Well, it's resting on that cardboard box, kind of unstable. So.
Peter, we can hear your microphone.
Sorry.
All right. Okay. So let me. We can get back to that, I guess, if it's time to look that up. But there's more evidence here, which is that the username fragment is repeated in RTC ICE parameters that we looked at just now, when it's already an optional field in each RTC ICE candidate, but outside the candidate string. So curiously, this matches how things are separated in SDP, where basically an A equals candidate line is pretty much the candidate string. And so in this example, we have 2 candidates, but they also share a single UFrag and a single password. So this seems, altogether, this looks like that get local candidates. So the proposal here is basically to specify get local candidates to return what's in local description.stp. Not all of it, obviously, but have that be its source of information for what it already is specified to return. And clarify for get remote candidates that it returns basically the candidates in the remote description. The nice thing of this is that the SDP is already a very well specified list of state that goes into negotiation, so we can rely on that. The benefit here is that we don't need any disambiguation or deduplication at all, because we can basically say that one of the issues we had was, do we need to create a RTC ICE candidate comparison algorithm to figure out when add ICE candidates called or when a renegotiation happens? We're looking at SDP again, and we're trying to determine, are these the same candidates as before, or are they new candidates that should be enumerated in get remote candidates, for example? And we end run all of this by basically saying the scope of what should be returned is only what is in the current generation. So we don't need to, so that takes care of deduplication as well. Basically saying it's a string compare on the candidate string. And last meeting, we decided to go with verbatim candidate string matching and not, what's the other one? Trying to do, what's the word I'm looking for? But basically trying to go beyond that and trying to recognize different, strings that have different, more leading zeros, for instance, in IPv6 address and that kind of stuff. So next slide, please. So this slide basically shows in the spec the proposed changes. So for get local candidates, returns the sequence describing the localized candidates in the local description. For get remote candidates, it's returns the sequence describing the remote ICE candidates in the remote description. And the note works as well. There's a note that says get remote candidates will not expose peer reflexive candidates since they are not in the remote description. And then the same changes for the get local parameters and get remote. Get local parameters and get remote parameters. Does that make sense? Any questions? Concerns? Tim?
So that means that you can have the selected pair being something that isn't in get remote candidates.
That is already the case for peer reflexive candidates.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's a shame. I mean, I understand the logic and I understand where you're coming from, and it is a clarification, but it's a shame.
Right. But that wasn't true before either. So that
No, I know.
I would say that it's orthogonal to the change.
Riffing off Peter's thing about it being the state of the peer connection that you're trying to reflect rather than the state of the SDP. If it was the state of the peer connection, then you would have the peer reflexive candidates there. And you'd certainly have the selected one. Right.
I mean, the old note says that get remote candidates will not expose peer reflexive candidates since they are not received via ICE and via add ICE candidate. Okay. There was actually a flaw with that as well, because that is actually, we discussed last month that was insufficient because new candidates can also come in the remote description. So we already had a note from last month to fix that. So get remote candidates should have been. So basically, I think what happened here is that this language basically comes from ORTC, where this, I think that explains why it was described this way, because it was trying to, like for instance, get local candidates says returns a sequence describing the local ICE candidates gathered for this ICE transport and sent in on ICE candidate, what happens to be the only two insertion points ahead if you discount SDP. And again, it was missing the fact that new candidates can also be exposed. Well, for remote candidates, there's a gap there, right? Because candidates can also appear in the remote description coming in set remote description. So I'm basically short-circuiting the description a little bit here, because we do, in WebRTC, we do have SDP defined already as the sort of primary state description of things in the peer connection and in negotiation. And we can lean on that basically to, like, we could still enumerate all the ways in which things get into local description and remote description, but it doesn't seem necessary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm faintly disappointed by the fact that you can be in the position that the selected candidate isn't in get remote candidates. That feels like a kind of, I mean, I understand how it get there, and I'm not even saying that we should change it. I'm just saying it's a disappointment.
Well, then, yeah, so this PR does not remove the note, basically. But clarifies the note. I think that's a separate issue we could discuss, but I think that this is by design in that I think it was determined. We have other language in WEBRTC PC to obfuscate the peer reflexive candidates, since that would potentially be a fingerprinting surface. So, but the short answer here is basically that looking back at the spec and what the original intent was, it's my determination that these methods were to save people from parsing SDP, basically. And that is where their remaining value. And I think if the spec wasn't in the recommendation already, we could talk about dropping some of these. But since the specification is in rec, I think we just have to implement these as simply as we can. All right, cool. Guido, I was curious what you think about this, because it would mean that Chrome's implementation of get local candidates would be accurate up until the point of ICE restart, at which point it would no longer be accurate.
Yes, in this case, well, like your proposal makes sense to me in terms that it sounds more useful and more correct than the old one, but we need to discuss internally about the potential compatibility issues that that the change could create for get local candidates. So we'll like we need to evaluate that before saying final yes. Although I can say that yeah, this definition makes more sense than the old one.
All right, great, thanks. That sounds like a. So I think next step here is we can work on a PR, and you'll check with your team on this.
Yes.
All right. Great, thank you. So I think we're 10 minutes early on this, so that's great. So next slide. And media capture grab bag is also me. Next slide. Yeah, so here we're going to talk about a single issue, which is 324 and media capture screen share. And this was filed by Elad a while back. Basically, he was proposing should calling get display media consume transient activation. And there's an important keyword here for people not familiar with transient activation. Transient activation used to be that you required a user gesture to call an API, and it got simplified to basically a timing based. Basically, the original user gesture is this JavaScript calling this method coming from a user action, and that turned out too complicated. So they made a simpler. It has too much time passed since the user clicked or interacted with the page to correlate this to say that the user clicked something within a reasonable amount of time so that they can call get display media. But there's a separate step. So there's the first step of transient activation is checking the time not too much time has passed. But the other is that consuming transient activation basically says to say that my action is the only action for this. I'm going to monopolize this user activity. So, which means that a user's click is now absorbed, basically. So the effect is that the web page can only call one API that requires consumption of transient activation from a single click, not two. So at first glance, this seems reasonable, Elad said. And this is also encouraged by the design guideline, which says to think about the effect of your API has on the user experience, as well as any risks presented to the user when deciding whether user activation needs to only occur once overall, which is sticky behavior, periodically transient behavior, or once per API call, transient consuming. We should also be designing for user intent and help users to make good decisions. So here I would argue that the get display media picker is, in all implementations, quite invasive, often modal, and that basically gating that by a dedicated user click seems to best match user intent. And this has been the case for similar methods that already consume user activation, such as requesting full screen on an element, or requesting picture-in-picture on a video element. So next slide, please. So there's one counter use case we're discussing here, which was opened in picture-in-picture, issue 261. And that is a website wants to open a presenter self-view picture-in-picture when starting a presentation from a single click. Basically, the web page gets a user click and wants to call get display media and put the local user's self-view camera in the picture-in-picture at the same time. But it turns out that this races both for focus and success. So basically today, request picture-in-picture consumes user activation, but get display media does not. So you have this weird case here that if you call get display media first and then immediately, without awaiting, also request picture-in-picture, these two APIs will basically race. Request picture-in-picture will consume the user activation, so these two will race with each other. And what will happen is kind of undefined a little bit, because you could have request picture-in-picture could consume the user activation from get display media, which means it fails. But what also could happen is if get display media happens first, then you get a picker, but at least in Firefox, the picker immediately loses its focus because picture-in-picture in Firefox consumes the focus. So, and it's also a bit jarring that two things are happening from a single click. So I think the user might also be a little confused, like what the hell happened here? So we think this is better solved by an existing feature of the get the screen capture spec, which is issue 322, which was merged, the Elad correctly pointed out, was merged a while back. It's in that get display media already confers transient activation when resolved, meaning that because get display media shows a picker, we'd earlier decided that when the user dismisses that picker, which they do have to do with the user click, that we think counts as user activation, which means that the following code works really nicely, is that we await get display media, which brings up a picker, and then only when the user clicks on that picker successfully to pick something to screen share, does the JavaScript code, async code here, continue. And at that point, if the JavaScript can then request picture-in-picture, it should work, so that you will get a picture-in-picture when the screen share picker closes. So we think this is a better solution to the racy problem of having both pip and get display media race. And Chrome actually has, well, I should say, implemented a media set. There's also a third option here, which is media session has that it didn't come in the slides, but media session has an enter picture-in-picture action handler that it could also be used for this particular use case. So I'm only mentioning this problem use case to basically say that there's a better solution for this one. So I think, yes, we should go ahead and consume transient activation in get display media. Any thoughts, objections? Tim?
So I have a question. Is there an interaction with audio play? So if you do your get display media and it includes audio, and you want to do a self view and a self audio, which seems unlikely, but just imagine there might be some musical use case where you wanted to do that. Then if you consume the activation, then the play will fail.
So the question is, does autoplay consume user activation?
No, it requires autoplay requires a user activation, but it won't get it from display media because it's already consumed it.
Hmm.
So if you put the two in the same button click, like, yes, I want to see my drummer, or I don't know whatever it is, but something where you're using get display media and you want to take the audio track and immediately play it locally, then I think this would break. I don't think it's a serious. I mean, I'm struggling to come up with a use case where I care, but I just want to know if there's if I'm right that there's an interaction there that we might be breaking some really obscure use case.
So I think your caution there is that can we make sure to look for more use cases that would be broken by this? And I think that's...
Well, specifically around audio.
Audio. I'm not aware of any use cases, but I think it's worthwhile caution to maybe look for those. So would it be possible to do that? I guess I'm wondering, can we move ahead with the PR and maybe raise any issues if you find them on that?
I was really fishing for, oh, that'll be fine from you. That, you know, no, because the activation's still valid for the next 100 milliseconds, so you'll be fine or something. But it really is consuming it, and it really is, sounds to me like autoplay might get audio autoplay might get interactions here. So that's like, like I said, I don't personally see a use case, but I don't know.
Okay. Now, I don't have the information right in front of me about autoplay, whether that consumes activation or not. But even if it did, I do struggle to... I would say that might be by design. So if you have a click, if the user clicks a button, having that both produce audio and a screen sharing picker might be a little bit jarring. So I would push back on the use case, I guess.
So my comparison here is that we do that absolutely all the time with get user media. Like if you do a get user media for and that we use the transient activation from the get user media as a way of enabling play. So they're in the same action from the user, and so we enable play at the same time as we've done get user media. And it sounds to me like this wouldn't follow the same pattern. And if nothing else, we should have a warning saying, hey, this is different from get user media. Because ostensibly they look quite similar from the developer's point of view, but what we're saying, I think, is that they will behave differently. Because get user media doesn't consume a transient activation, as far as I know.
Correct. Yes. Although we kind of wish we had done that. So.
Okay. So
yes.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that can we just flag a warning here, which is that difference is highlighted, so that people don't think that they're the same behavior, because they're not.
So I just did a quick AI lookup here, and ChatGPT claims that media autoplay is tied to the browser's autoplay policy, which often takes into account whether the page has sticky activation. So I think that might be okay. But yeah, it's worth looking into.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think just a warning that it's different is sufficient. That it doesn't behave like get user media in this respect.
All right. So do you think we can cautiously proceed here? And you would like to hear more about how this interacts with autoplay, if at all? It's what I'm hearing.
I'm happy that we proceed with it. I think at least a warning in the text is necessary.
Yeah, I can take an action to to explore this with some testing. So that is good feedback. But I'm hoping to do that at the same time as I work on a PR, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Any other comments on this?
Yeah, I think it would be good that that you conduct this testing and that we can see the what you tested and what the results were, so that we can confidently land it without risking compatibility.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds good. So I'll take an action to do that. And I think that was the last slide. So that means we are almost 30 minutes early. So if there are no other issues to discuss, I think we can end early. All right. Thank you, everyone. And so no meeting next month, but we meet again in September 15th. All right. Hope to see you then. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.